There's a man standing in his driveway on a Saturday morning. The light is still low. The neighborhood is quiet except for a few birds and the distant hum of someone's lawnmower 2 streets over. He's got a cup of coffee in one hand and a rag in the other. And he's looking at a car, not a new car, not even a recent car. This one has been in the family so long it has its own story. A small dent near the rear bumper from a parking lot in 2009. A scratch above the wheel well that nobody remembers how it got there. The interior smells faintly of old upholstery and something familiar. Coffee, probably from 1,000 early mornings exactly like this one. He wipes down the hood slowly. No rush. No particular reason other than the fact that this is what he does on Saturday mornings. He's done it for years. His neighbor across the street just got a new truck. Financed it. Shiny. Red. Gets about 15 miles per gallon and comes with a payment that lasts 72 months. His neighbor seems proud of it. Parks it at an angle in the driveway so people can see it better from the street. The man with the old car glances over, then goes back to his hood. Something about that scene is worth stopping on. Not the car itself, not the neighbor's truck, but the man. The quiet certainty of him. The way he moved without explanation, without justification, without needing anyone to understand. Why does a man like this exist? Why, in a country built on the mythology of the new, the upgrade, the trade-in, the fresh start, does a certain kind of Gen X man simply refuse to participate? And here's the more interesting question beneath that one. Is it really about the car at all? The answer, it turns out, is no. Never was. There's a particular generation that grew up watching America change in ways that nobody fully prepared them for. The tail end of the manufacturing era, the beginning of the digital one. Parents who worked in factories, or drove trucks, or ran small businesses. People who fixed things when they broke, because buying new wasn't always an option, and because wasting something that still worked felt almost immoral. That generation is now in their late 40s, their 50s, some of them pushing into their 60s. A surprising number of them are still driving the same cars they bought 15 or 20 years ago. Not because they can't afford something newer. Often because they genuinely don't want one. But there's something running underneath that decision. Something deeper than practicality. Something that has a lot to do with identity and memory, a quietly held set of values that the modern world doesn't have a great word for anymore. We'll get to all of it. First, think about the last time someone pressured you to upgrade something you were perfectly happy with. A phone, a television, a car. Think about the specific feeling that pressure created. Not quite guilt, not quite shame. Something more like the quiet suggestion that the way you were living wasn't quite enough. That feeling has a name in psychology, and it's been following Gen X men around for decades. There's a concept researchers talk about when studying how people relate to their possessions. They call it object attachment. The emotional relationship humans develop with things they've owned for a long time. It's not the same as materialism. In fact, it's almost the opposite. Materialists chase new things. Object attachment is about depth, not novelty. It's about the accumulated meaning an object picks up over years of use. The car in that driveway isn't just a car. It's the vehicle that was there when something important happened. The one his kids fell asleep in on the way home from somewhere. The one that made it through a difficult winter, that tested a lot more than just its engine. The one he knows, the way you can only know something you've put real time into. And the knowing itself has value. Research from the American Psychological Associations suggests that adults over 50 who maintain long-term attachments to meaningful objects often report higher levels of life satisfaction than those who frequently replace their possessions. Not because the objects make them happy exactly, but because those objects are part of an ongoing story, And humans, more than almost anything else, need their lives to feel like a coherent story. Here's what's surprising. That's not even the deepest layer. Most people assume that a Gen X man who refuses to buy a new car is making a financial decision. And sometimes he is. More often than people realize, what's actually happening is that he's making a statement about who he trusts. Think about it this way. Every time you buy something new, you are, at some level, accepting the premise that what you had wasn't good enough. That the version of you who bought the old thing made a worse choice than the version of you who buys the new thing will make. You are trusting the marketplace judgment about your needs over your own direct experience of what actually works for you. Gen X man who keeps his old car has quietly decided that he trusts his own experience more than he trusts advertising, more than he trusts the opinion of people who don't know him, more than he trusts the cultural message that newer is always better. That kind of trust, in your own lived experience, in your own judgment, and the quiet evidence of what has actually served you well, is rarer than it sounds. It's something that tends to develop specifically in men who went through the particular experiences that shaped Generation X think about what it meant to grow up in the 70s and 80s. The economy was volatile in ways that touched ordinary families directly. Interest rates were brutal. Unemployment was real. Parents worked hard at jobs that didn't always reward that work fairly. The lesson that filtered down to their kids, sometimes spoken, more often just absorbed, was that you don't throw away something that still works. That waste is a kind of moral failure. The man who fixes his own car is a different kind of man than the one who trades it in the moment it becomes inconvenient. That lesson didn't leave. A lot of what shaped Gen X went underground in the culture of the 90s and 2000s, when prosperity made it fashionable to forget where things came from. It didn't disappear from the men who carried it. It just became private. Became one of those things you do without explaining, because explaining it would require a conversation you're not sure the other person is ready to have. Think about what it meant to grow up watching your father fix things. Not because he loved fixing things necessarily, but because that was what responsible men did. They didn't call someone else unless they had to. They didn't replace something that could be repaired, put their hands on problems and figured them out. There was no particular glamour in it. That was the point. Here's another thing most people never consider. The decision to keep an old car is also quietly a decision about time. New cars come with new relationships, a new dealership, a new payment, a new warranty that requires you to do things a certain way. New learning curve for features you didn't ask for and may never use. They come with the implicit contract that in 3 to 5 years you'll do this again. The old car asks for none of that. It asks for maintenance. Real maintenance, the kind that requires attention and some level of knowledge. But it doesn't ask for your loyalty to an institution. It doesn't ask you to participate in a cycle that someone else designed for someone else's benefit. There's something psychologists call autonomy orientation. The degree to which a person makes decisions based on their own values and internal sense of what matters, rather than external pressure or social comparison. Studies on autonomy consistently find that people with high autonomy orientation report greater psychological well-being, particularly in middle age and beyond. They tend to feel less anxious, less subject to the low-level hum of inadequacy that comes from constantly measuring yourself against what you don't have. The Gen X man who keeps driving his old car year after year while everyone around him upgrades. He is, whether he knows it or not, exercising a form of autonomy that protects something essential about his sense of self. But there's another side to this. It's worth looking at honestly. Some men hold on to old cars, not because of wisdom, but because change itself has become uncomfortable. Not because they've thought through what the car represents, because the thought of walking into a dealership and starting that whole process creates an anxiety they'd rather not deal with. Is the car a choice or a default? Is the routine around it a practice or an avoidance? That's a question each man has to answer for himself. And the answer isn't always flattering. There's a difference between the man who keeps his old car because he genuinely values what it represents: reliability, self-sufficiency, the rejection of manufactured desire, and the man who keeps it because making a decision feels overwhelming and the status quo is just easier. Both men look the same from the outside on a Saturday morning, wiping down the hood, but inside they're living very different relationships with their choice. What's worth noticing is that the first kind of man, the one making a genuine values-based decision, tends to have an ease about him, a settledness. He's not defending the car, he's not explaining it. He's not even particularly aware that it needs explaining. He just lives inside a set of choices that feel deeply consistent with who he is. That consistency is one of the most reliable predictors of psychological well-being that researchers have found in adults over 50. The second kind of man, the one avoiding, tends to carry a low-level tension, an awareness that something is unresolved, a faint dissatisfaction that doesn't quite have a name. The car is the same in both cases. The psychology couldn't be more different. There's something else happening in that driveway on Saturday morning that's easy to overlook. The ritual of it, the wiping down of the hood, the checking of the fluids, the attention to something mechanical in an age when most things run invisibly, through code and cloud and systems that can't be seen or touched. There's something about maintaining a physical thing, something you understand, something you can put your hands on. That does something specific to a man's sense of competence. Psychologists who study men in midlife and beyond have found that one of the most significant sources of psychological distress in this age group is what they call competence erosion. The gradual sense that the skills you spent your life developing no longer apply to the world you're living in. The economy changed, the technology changed, the ways that value gets created changed, and a man who built his identity around being capable, around being useful, around knowing how things work, that man can increasingly invisible in a world where the things that need knowing are intangible. The old car resists that. It needs what he has. It responds to his knowledge. It rewards his attention. In a world where almost everything is designed to be replaced rather than repaired, the old car is one of the few things left that says, the skills you have still matter here. AARP research has consistently shown that adults who maintain a sense of purposeful activity, activities that require skill, attention, produce a tangible outcome, report significantly lower rates of depression and cognitive decline in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. The man in the driveway may not be thinking about any of this. He's just changing the oil. But the brain doesn't care about the narrative. It just responds to what's actually happening. Somewhere around 1985, he might have watched his father do exactly this. Same Saturday morning light, same quiet neighborhood, same slow, attentive motion. Maybe there was a specific kind of silence between them, the comfortable kind, where nothing needs to be said because both people are focused on the same thing. Those memories don't fade. They become part of how a person understands what it means to be the kind of man they're trying to be, consciously, not as a deliberate program, but as a felt sense of rightness, of continuity, of one generation passing something forward to the next without ever having to name it. The old car carries that too. This is worth sitting with for a moment. In a culture that is almost pathologically focused on the future, on the next version, the upcoming model, the coming upgrade, There is something quietly radical about a man who finds meaning in continuity, who values what has already been proven over what is being promised. Who trusts the accumulated evidence of years over the polished claims of the new. That isn't nostalgia, exactly. Nostalgia is passive. This is active. It's a choice made again every year to keep going with what works, to resist the manufactured anxiety that says you're falling behind if you're not constantly starting over. The Gallup organization has tracked life satisfaction across age groups for decades. One of their most consistent findings is that the factors most strongly correlated with high well-being in older adults have almost nothing to do with material circumstances. What matters more than almost anything else is a sense of consistency. The feeling that who you are today connects naturally to who you were 10 years ago and who you expect to be 10 years from now. Coherent self. A life that feels like yours. The man with the old car, without necessarily knowing it, has built that. Every year he keeps driving the same vehicle. He's reinforcing a narrative about himself. A man who doesn't need to perform. Who doesn't buy into the idea that his value is tied to his possessions. Who has, through small repeated choices, constructed a self that doesn't require constant maintenance in the way that image-based identities do. There's a quiet freedom in that. It shows in ways that are hard to put into words, but easy to feel when you're around someone who has it. A certain groundedness, lack of that low-level restlessness that follows people who are always measuring themselves against what they don't yet have. A comfort in their own skin that doesn't come from achievement or accumulation, from something quieter. The sense that they've already figured out what matters to them and stop needing to prove it to anyone. That's increasingly rare. In a world where identity has become something performed for an audience, on social media, in conversations, through the visible markers of consumption, the man who simply lives according to his own internal standard, without broadcasting it, without seeking validation for it, stands out in a way he probably doesn't even notice. Think about someone you know like this. Maybe it's a father, an uncle, a neighbor, maybe it's you. There's something in the way these men carry themselves. Lack of urgency. A sense that they don't need to convince anyone of anything. They've already settled the question of who they are. The car is just one piece of evidence among many. Near the end of the morning, the man sets down his rag, takes a long sip of coffee, which has gone almost cold, looks at the car one more time. It starts on the first try every time. Has for years. He nods almost imperceptibly. The way you acknowledge something that has been reliable. The way you recognize something that has earned its place in your life. Then he walks inside. Neighbor's new truck is still parked at an angle across the street. Still catching the light. Still very red. Nobody is looking at it. Thing about a life built on genuine values, rather than borrowed ones, is that it tends to get quieter as it gets stronger. The need for external validation shrinks. Compulsion to explain yourself to people who weren't asking fades. What remains is something simpler and more durable. The daily experience of living in alignment with what you actually believe. That's what's happening in that driveway on Saturday morning. Not just a man cleaning a car. A man practicing, in the most ordinary way imaginable, the art of knowing who he is. If you recognize something in that scene, if some part of it described a person you know, or a version of yourself you've seen in the mirror, then you already understand what this video was really about. Car was never the point. If you find yourself drawn to this kind of reflection, to videos that take ordinary moments and look at what's actually happening beneath the surface, then you might want to stay close to this channel. There's more of this here. Always has been. Take care of what's worth keeping.